non ci annoiamo, abbiamo delle cose da fare, abbiamo tante cose da fare e possiamo farle. E su questo io vi voglio presentare il prossimo ospite, che è un ospite davvero straordinario, che è venuto da San Francisco per raccontarci questa storia. Molti lo conoscono, oppure molti lo conoscono perché è quello che ha inventato l'espressione Web 2.0. Quante volte abbiamo sentito recitare l'espressione Web 2.0? Ecco, la prima volta al mondo in una conferenza di O'Reilly l'ha pronunciata lui, l'ha raccontata lui, l'ha spiegata lui che cos'era. E noi ci siamo andati avanti, credo che se avesse messo un minimo copyright da un penny per tutte le volte che abbiamo riusato l'espressione 2.0, quest'uomo sarebbe straricco. Ma lui è straricco di passione, straricco anche di ammiratori per quello che ha fatto. Nel 2005 ha fondato la rivista Make, che è diventata, come diceva Chris Anderson, la Bibbia dei maker. E da qualche anno negli Stati Uniti e in tutto il mondo si svolgono delle maker Faire di grandissimo successo e molto spettacolari, dove i maker vanno a far vedere le loro cose. È il leader vero del movimento dei maker. Please welcome Dale Dougherty. Sorry.
Thank you.
That's for you.
Okay, good. Thank you. Good afternoon. So, in the past, we can find times when there were explosions of creativity, when there was an openness to new ideas and the emergence of new tools and techniques that really led to new forms of self-expression. And I think on a cultural level, resulted in kind of personal and social transformation. So what if we don't just find those things in the past, but what if we could find them in the present? I think we're seeing something in this maker movement that is perhaps quite small today, but is the roots of something that we may one day look back on and say, look at all this amazing creativity that was unleashed, not by a few people, not by the geniuses, but by ordinary people. So I'm going to talk to you today about the maker movement, and I sort of use the term, ironically, leading and following it, because there really is no head of this movement. There is no person that stands at the center of it. It is something where a lot of people are contributing all at once and all together and communicating loosely and tightly to make it happen. How many of you are makers? Raise your hand. Come on, is that all I'm going to get? Is that all? Okay, pay attention. I'll ask you again later. So, makers are enthusiasts. They are people who love what they're doing. They're amateurs. They enjoy something. Now, you may not have raised your hand because you thought making is only about Arduinos or 3D printers. But do you cook? Do you make clothes? Do you have hobbies? Do you have things that you love to do? That, I think, is the essential connection here. And DIY is, again, do it yourself. Not that you necessarily do this alone, but you have to initiate it. If it has to start as something within you, like an artistic urge to create something, do something, learn something. And once you do, you meet a great number of other people who share that common interest or common goal. And that's what's really special here. When I started Make, it was actually grounded in something that was not serious. It was grounded in the idea of play, that we have hobbies, we have our interests, we have these things we love to do, which mean something to us and are rewarding and satisfying. There's something that we have great control over because they're ours. But the most important thing is we would most likely do them anyway, without reward, without recognition, without financial gain. And I began to see this, say, in the early 2000s these are adults, I'm not talking about kids playing here. Adults, innovators, creative people that are around technology. When they saw some new technology that came out, they wanted to take the wrapper off and play with it and figure out what it was good for and what they could do with it and how they could change it. If you know the term hacker, sometimes used in a negative context, But hacking is a way of modifying or changing something, and often making it do something it was not really intended to do. Makers are all of that. And out of that play, that immersion in a technology, comes innovation. And I think of this as bottom-up innovation, grassroots innovation. It's not the kind of innovation that comes from an R&D lab or a well-financed incubator. It comes out of this community of experimentation and play. Now, it's happened before, and you recognize the figures on there, but this is a quote from Wozniak saying, "I love going down to the homebrew computer club and showing off my ideas and my designs. And I would do that for free for the rest of my life." Now, things worked out a little bit better for him than just doing it for free, but I think you get the idea. And that's the first Apple computer. It's pretty crude. So when you look at maker things today, realize that they can be improved. And as some of us mentioned, they could really use some good design. So I started Make Magazine about in 2005, and it sort of grew out of this idea that people were hacking the physical world. They were going to look at the physical world the way we looked at our computer. On your computer, you have preferences and profiles. You can change the way things work. The physical world isn't necessarily set up for those kind of interfaces. But what if it was? What if physical things connected to digital things? I also went back after having the idea and found really a tradition to embrace, if you will, just as you might look back in Italy and find those traditions. But in America, it was a magazine called Popular Mechanics. It still exists, but in the early 20th century, many of these things start in the second decade of the 20th century for some reason. You know, it was a magazine that had fun things to do. It was all about fun. And this is 1961, you know, and the guys on the right are current versions of kind of doing the same thing that's on the cover. But look at the bottom of that. Make your own printed circuits. I mean, we're still doing these things today. A little bit different tools, but it was there. It was kind of pre-computer. In many ways, the computer killed off a lot of this because it became the tool we learned and focused on. And now I think we're sort of digested the computer and have looked for other things. This is 1944, What to Make, a special edition of Popular Mechanics, 50 cents. So we've updated that whole idea, put different kinds of people on the cover, but different kinds of projects. You can kind of see, feel remote objects with sonar, control machines with your eyes. These are things that not someone else is doing. This is something you can do. That's the promise today. Not that some genius in some research lab did it, but you can do it. This is a project from the current magazine. Anybody know what that is? What? What'd you say? Geiger counter. So, remember the Japan earthquake and the tsunami and the subsequent nuclear meltdown. People were hungry to find Geiger counters. They couldn't buy them. They were also needed batteries because the lights were out. But what happened is we relied on our government to provide us with the radiation data from the fallout, and people in Japan said, the government's not giving us good information. I need to test that myself. And we need to share that data on the internet. And so this project comes out of that movement of people trying to figure out how to build their own Geiger counter and make it so that it was a data logging Geiger counter. So as many have mentioned today, in open source hardware, it is kind of at the core of what we're doing here. We're taking the ethos and almost the instrumentation of open source software and applying it to physical things. And many things come along with that. And one is the idea of a community collaborating, contributing, and growing a base of software. Now, you may not say, that may not register with you. Let me give you an example. If you have a term paper and you're a student, okay, 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, you would have gone to the school library and done your research. Today, you go to Wikipedia and pretty much copy that into your term paper, I would guess. But imagine if Wikipedia isn't there. You have to go back to that library, you have to find that book may be missing. So this idea of sharing creates this foundation that you're able to build on top of. Ideally, you don't copy Wikipedia. You get some basic information that allows you to refine what you are doing and what you're building on top of that. In much the same way, the difference between Web 1.0 and Web 2.0 was that 2.0, they were platforms, stacks of software that developers could use, and they needed smaller teams and less money to do so, which means they can get to market and prove their idea more efficiently. The other side that we're seeing here is that, like the guitar, we're all using the same tools. I mean, Chris mentioned it today, but think about that. It used to be that there was these professional-grade tools and then these amateur or consumer-grade tools. They're like collapsing on each other, and it's not always good for the professional tool makers. MakerBot is important not because it invents 3D printing, but because it brings the price point down and that ordinary people can buy a 3D printer and put it in their house and do something with it. The funny thing, these enthusiasts, these makers, they don't know what they're going to do with the 3D printer, but they want one anyway. Just as the early personal computer hackers wanted a personal computer so they could figure out what it was good for. So fabrication, the fabrication tools, the techniques, the ideas here, to be able to make almost anything, to make one of most anything. These are breakthroughs. And again, you may not quite get that yet, but sometimes we see things on the 3D printers and they look, they're just like people printing out figures. But a guy last week was showing me a small jet engine that he had printed out on a 3D printer. And this is the work environment. This is actually at Georgia Tech University, a mechanical engineering department. Just walking in, they had a makerspace there. I was glad to see a copy of my magazine, but that's an EggBot, which is another little CNC kind of machine. And they're designing on computers and, in a sense, going from there to making things. The other thing that I think is really important here that's made all of this kind of come together is the notion of interconnected communities. We all know that communities exist by geography, by skills, by interests. But what if they're all sort of interconnected in ways that were not possible? And it's even possible for you to move from community to community easily, to be that person who has a foot in the 3D printing community and a foot in Rome and a foot in, marathoning. And somehow you end up putting those things together in unique ways and coming up with new ideas. So two things that I want to kind of emphasize is where I think the maker movement comes together. Something that followed on about a year after the magazine is Maker Faire. And then, as we've mentioned here several times, maker spaces, the physical getting together. When you're doing software, open source software online, you can collaborate pretty easily by just sharing your code on GitHub and finding discussion groups. But there seems to be something about doing physical things, making physical goods, that you want to be physically together to share ideas and expertise. Part of that is because a lot of the way you still learn in this community is looking over someone's shoulder. It's watching it happen, on a one-to-one basis. So this is Maker Faire. And I could show you some great videos about Maker Faire. We could have a lot of fun with it because it's spectacular fun. I mean, last year in the Bay Area, we had over 100,000 people on 2 days. And it's just packed with families, people showing you very interesting things. And back to that idea of community. What it really is an opportunity to flush out of the community all these things that are in someone's basement or backyard or garage. That's their private project. And they are here to show it and showcase it to other people. So Maker Faire is a bit of an art fair, a craft fair, a science fair, kind of mashed together. And you'll see all kinds of things, but it's motivated really by the chance. Did you see how many people were standing around the 3D printer on break? I mean, they just want to stand and watch it go, and they want to ask the people who built it, how does it work? What does it do? Why is it set up that way? It's that kind of conversation that Maker Faire enables. And I think the real exciting thing is there's talk here about doing a Maker Faire, whether somewhere, maybe multiple places in Italy. So let me just speak to that for a moment. Maker Faire is a little bit like what you see in the corridor out there where people have brought their projects and ideas. But what if each of you brought something? Instead of sitting here, we'd have your project and you'd be talking about it. You'd have a big smile on your face because you're very proud of it and you want to let people know what you love doing. And the task of building a Maker Faire or creating a Maker Faire is really one of community building. It's going out into the community, finding where the robots are, finding where the interactive art is, finding the embroidery folks, and again, trying to push them together, mash them together into that event. And what it does is it allows those communities to interconnect, and they become resources to each other. So here's some of the fun things. I mean, this is the head of a robotic giraffe that's like 19 foot tall. These are electric muffins that speed around the fair. So a lot of this is sort of entertainment. It's fun. And people build these, almost on the idea of, creating a behavior that interacts with other people. I mean, people love to gather around these muffins. They even have Acme Muffineering Garage where they fix them when they're broken. So we've seen Maker Faire grow. The blue lines are the ones we've organized, and the red lines are the growth of independent or mini Maker Fairs that we've opened it up and said, here's what we know about making a Maker Faire. If you want to create one of your own, you can go ahead and do so. This is where Maker Fairs will be taking place this year. I believe there's about 50 of them, and spread out around the globe. So just as I get together a Maker Faire, it brings people together for a weekend. And tremendous energy, tremendous sense that look at what we have in our community. I want to emphasize, Maker Faire is not about bringing something from California to, say, a place like Rome. It is a matter of finding in Rome and in Italy where your makers are. Who are the people here that do cool things? They're here. You just don't know where they are yet. They really are. I mean, I'm always amazed, and obviously you have someone like Massimo Bonzi that's a leader and is pretty well connected to a group of them. But I think he would admit, if you had a fair, he'd find 2/3 of the people would be new. The other places where makers get together is I'll call maker spaces, also called hacker spaces, also called Fab Labs. So it seems to be important to combine skills, tools, resources, expertise in a place. And some of these places are quite small. The resources are small as well in dollars. But the energy and the heart that's there is quite large. This is a place in Dallas, Texas, kind of a collage of photos. Some of the things that happen in makerspaces, they build their own furniture. The work tables there were built by the members. They're organized by function. They have a craft room. They have a bio lab. They have a wood shop. They have an auto shop. They're working on an electric car there. Someone bought an old CNC machine and is creating new software interface for it. So it reflects that sort of DIY spirit. In the right are hammers from a blacksmith area. So we see maker spaces that are freestanding in a building on their own. They're in science centers, in libraries, churches, and museums. Particularly interested in the museums and science centers where it's a new kind of interaction to invite people, say, going into an art museum to make art instead of just seeing art, to participate. The one place we don't see enough of them in is education. And that's my personal goal, is to figure out how to get maker spaces into schools, replacing somewhat the old shop class that we had, at least in America, replacing even the computer lab, which isn't well used today in most places, and to encourage kids to create, participate, make things based on their own interest, not based on an academic agenda. At the core of this maker movement is the notion of projects. It's the unit of work. It's what we do and what we share. And getting people to share, that has made all the difference. Even in the makerspace, I visit one, and some makers will write the name of their project, the URL, and the email. It says, here's what I'm doing, so you could contact me. But at the heart of this, particularly in education, it's not just about what you know, but it's what you can do with what you know. And makers are particularly good at that. And they figure out that they don't know something, and they rely on the community, they rely on online resources, or they rely on their friends to find out. So here's an example how this all fits together. I saw this as an exhibit at our Maker Faire in Detroit last summer, and it was a group of about 5 20-year-olds who some were in school, some weren't, and it was an autonomous balloon. And this is pretty much the telemetry section of it, but they were trying to build a balloon to do a transatlantic crossing, and this was their test rig for that. When I asked them where they were from, they said Louisville, Kentucky, and they said they were from the hackerspace there. This is their project, the White Star Balloon Project. Now, about 3 years ago, 2 teachers came to the Maker Faire in the Bay Area from Louisville and met other people who had maker spaces. And they went home and said, we need a maker space there. And they started one. And they came back last year to meet other people and be part of the groups that exhibit from maker spaces. But what had happened is, and these weren't the founders, but that maker space gave life to this project, this White Star Balloon Project, because someone walked in and said, I'm interested in doing, high-altitude ballooning, and I need some other people who know things that want to work on the project. So that project was formed, incubated, and shared there. I don't know what will happen to it, whether it'll ever be commercialized. It might just be a fun project. Here's another example. It was in our magazine of a couple guys. Instead of being at a hackerspace, these guys were at NASA, the space agency in America, but they were figuring out they could build satellites for under $8,000. NASA was spending millions of dollars on this, right? They just recently spun out of NASA and set up a company. So one of the trends here is that makers use off-the-shelf components to create things that many large companies spent a lot of time creating proprietary closed versions of. Kits are a really important thing here. We just did a special issue on kits. It is a way to organize projects for a lot of people. I like this quote from Michael Schrage, an economist who wrote in it, talented amateurs don't just build kits, kits build talented amateurs. It's a business model. They're like apps. It gives makers something they can sell. It's a way to get started for new makers, And it also gives them access to components that they might find somewhat difficulty to buy individually. So in summary, the maker movement is open hardware meets open software. You throw in a little bit of fabrication tools. You make kits available to a broad number of people. And you have this highly connected community of makers. And out of that, I think, comes a new culture of creativity. Now, the real thing I think that matters is whether this culture of creativity is limited to the few people that raise their hands here. Meaning, an insignificant number of people raise their hands. If this movement is to be something like a renaissance, it has to be motivated by something like this. All of us are makers. All of us can participate. All of us are leaders and followers of the maker movement. Thank you very much.
Please. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
Thank you.